So, adding a heatsink to an Elgato HD60 Pro capture card. Why? That question has a very long and complicated answer to go with it. The how is simple enough to illustrate, and I'm going to be showing you exactly how I did it in this very video. But the why isn't really what you'd call an exact science. Unfortunately though, I don't think this video will be complete without the why, so let's get that out of the way first. If all you care about is the how, then there'll be a timestamp in this video's description that will take you straight there. If, however, you clicked on this video with the intention to leave far more confused than you were when you arrived, then you've come to the right place. It all started back on March 30th, 2018, when Gamers Nexus uploaded their review of the Elgato 4K 60 Pro capture card. If you're not familiar with it, then it's basically a device that can record your gameplay from either console or PC over HDMI up to a resolution of 4K and at a frame rate of 60 FPS. Now, I'm not here to give a detailed rundown of this review. I'm not looking to plagiarise the guy's work. If you're interested in one of these, then I'll leave a link to the review and their channel in the description of this video, and trust me, you will not find a more detailed review of this product on YouTube. What I will say though, is that Steve points out a potential flaw in this product that could be cause for concern. While the metal shroud that surrounds the 4K 60 Pro may look like it contains a heatsink or fan or some way from dissipating the heat from its internals, it does not. The shroud and backplate on the 4K 60 are purely for cosmetic purposes only and do not aid in cooling the device in any shape or form. And as a result of this, its internals can reach temperatures of up to 90 degrees Celsius whilst it's passing through a HDMI signal. Now, it is worth mentioning that while an operating temperature of 90 degrees Celsius sounds a little bit uncomfortable, in the eyes of Elgato, that is clearly fine. Like Steve even mentions in his review, if 90 degrees Celsius was a problem, then Elgato wouldn't be shipping this device with an airflow obstructing shroud. They'd be shipping it with some kind of cooling solution, i.e. a heatsink or a fan. And so, with that in mind, and also bearing in mind that I don't even have a 4K 60 Pro, I have a HD60 Pro, a lower end device, smaller, less internals overall, probably consumes less power and in turn outputs less heat. Why have I put a heatsink on it? Well, that brings me to the next part of our little journey. So, about a month ago, a friend at work asked me if I could fix his laptop, an Acer Aspire E1571, and it was in a sorry state. It needed a new base chassis, a new screen bezel, new screen hinges, a new keyboard, and some new thermal paste on the CPU. And while I was trawling the depths of eBay to try and find these parts, I came across this. A brand new heatsink for an Acer Aspire E1571 for £1.50. Shipped. First class. Next day delivery. And my curiosity just got the better of me. I was just like, how can you get an unbelievably niche part for a 5-year-old laptop, brand new, shipped to your door, first class, tracked, next day delivery for £1.50? I just had to buy it. I figured, if it never shows up, then great. I've just exposed an evil scam artist on eBay for the fiendish, conniving burden to society that they really are. And if it does show up, I've got to be honest, I really didn't think that far ahead, as I honestly thought it was a fake listing. Lo and behold, next day, boom, there it was. Brand spanking new heatsink. Now, I could have just put it in my friend's laptop, but there was nothing wrong with the heatsink already in his laptop, so yeah. And that was where that story sat for a while, until about 2 weeks ago, when I really don't know what came over me. I was just sort of looking at my capture card, then I looked at the heatsink, it was still on my desk, still had packaging around it, and it just sort of happened, okay? It was a bank holiday, I was bored, and yeah, moving on to the how. First things first, we actually have to open up the thing. Luckily, it's just 6 screws spread around the outside of the device. I then scraped off these strips of vibration dampening foam on the front and back of the fairly tiny fin array on the heatsink we're going to be using. I'm guessing at one point this would come in handy, considering it was once crammed inside the chassis of a laptop, but since its new home is going to be floating in midair, not so much need for it anymore. Next, I needed to figure out which one of the 5 main chips I was going to stick this thing on, and see if I could orientate it in such a way that I could still use the metal shroud that came with the capture card. In the end, I decided on this one here, the 10-bit MST3367CMK-LF-170. I know, catchy name, right? This is the card's image processing chip. This is where every frame of recorded gameplay gets initially encoded before being exported, after which it offloads the work to your CPU or GPU, depending on how you set up your recording software. Now, I chose this chip for a few reasons. The first being that it is by far the biggest, and it has the most traces leading away from it, meaning that it's probably doing the most work out of the 5 main chips on this board. The second being that it has the most capacitors, both surrounding it on the front side of the board and beneath it on the back side of the board, meaning that it, again, probably is drawing the most power and thus producing the most heat. And thirdly, well, aesthetically it actually lines up pretty well when it comes to positioning underneath the metal shroud. Now, were reasons 1 and 2 complete guesswork? Absolutely. Am I going to halt progress on this project because of that fact? Absolutely not. Next. Now it's time to mark where we'll be making the initial incision to allow the heat pipe of the heatsink to pass through the shroud, which, after some incredibly rough eyeballing, I have determined to be about here. Now all we have to do is clamp this thing to a vise, apply some duct tape around my marks to help prevent my hacksaw from drifting effortlessly across my wrists, and voila! Whilst the steel that this shroud is made of is quite hard, it is also quite thin, so after making the 2 straight cuts, the tab just snapped off the main body pretty easily. Still looks rough as fuck though, so let's fix that with a bit of filing. And after removing the tape and brushing the crap off, it looks a little something like this. Yes, it still looks like a gunshot wound in the frying pan, but don't worry. We should be able to buff off the rest of that rough during sanding, which coincidentally is the next step. I used P80 in my case, but any coarse grit will do really. We're only looking to remove the paint. And about 20 minutes of sanding later, this is how she's looking. Scratched to fuck, to be sure, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't digging this sort of bare metal look to the shroud. I was tempted to leave it like this and not paint it, but if I'm honest, unprotected metal, this pitted is never a good idea in any situation. So, on with painting. We're going to be using XHT paint, or Extremely High Temperature Paint. I got this particular can on Amazon some time ago for about £9, and it's actually the same paint I used for the top plate of my CPU heatsink. Big shout out to Be Quiet for making that top plate so easily removable, by the way. Definitely made it much easier to paint. I wasn't sure how many coats to give it going into this, but I ended up giving the shroud around 5 coats and the heatsink only 4. The heatsink seemed to soak up the white a lot faster than the shroud for some reason. Now it's time to put this little hot rod back together. First things first, we need to actually apply some thermal compound to the chip we'll be attaching the heatsink to. Initially, I was planning on using some Noctua NTH1 thermal paste, as I had some left over from when I built my computer about a year ago. However, while it isn't electrically conductive, so we wouldn't have to worry about shorting anything out if we were a little too generous with our application, I also had these thermal pads from Silverstone. They're intended to be used to cover the NAND and controller chips on M.2 SSDs, but seeing as the box came with a few spares, I thought this would be a cleaner and simpler solution, especially if I ever wanted to remove this heatsink in the future. So I just cut one of the strips to match the size of our little chip, and we're good to go. Now we're at the tricky part, actually clamping the heatsink down to the chip. At first, I genuinely wasn't sure how to proceed. I originally thought I'd be able to pull double duty on some of the screw holes around the PCB, but only one of them really lined up with the mounting holes on the cold plate, and one screw really wasn't going to give us a nice uniform clamping force over the chip, so that was kind of out of the question. But then I realised, what if we could use the shroud as a kind of pseudo mounting bracket? With an appropriate spacer over the top of the cold plate, we could use the 4 screws used to mount the shroud as our mounting bracket. The question is, what do we use as a spacer? We need it to be soft and compressible enough so that it won't morph the shape of the shroud when we screw it down, but also something hard enough so that we're actually getting adequate uniform clamping force across the chip. After all, if we just kind of left it dangling there, we're not really getting any benefit when it comes to transferring heat away from the chip. At first, my material of choice was a bit dubious. It was some of that foam from flight cases, but I quickly realised that this is way too compressible for this application. Continuing down the packing foam route, however, I came across this gear, some kind of packing wrap from a recent Amazon delivery. When folded into layers, it seems to compress quite nicely, around a centimetre or so, and then becomes quite hard once it's fully compressed. Should be just what we need. So I just lined up the sheet with the cold plate, cut around it, and repeated this process until we had 4 little spaces, although I did only end up needing 2. Now all we have to do is sandwich it all together. Screw the shroud into place. And there you have it, an Elgato HD60 Pro with a hot rod style heatsink in white. Now, will this modification improve the performance of your HD60 Pro? Absolutely not. Is your HD60 Pro now overclockable? Absolutely not. Will the addition of a heatsink increase the lifespan of the chip that it's covering? Probably not, highly unlikely. However, does it look like it does all of those things and more? Yes. And you know what? That's good enough for me. Well, that just about does that. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming on this completely pointless journey with me, and if you'd like to see more of it, then I recommend you subscribe to stay up to date with my latest videos. I plan on using this platform as a kind of playground for more pointless shit like this, so if you'd like the sound of that, I'd be glad to have you back next time. Have a sexy afternoon. Until next time.